All right, so here we are for the talk. As Dr. Kimmel mentioned, my talk is on causal inference from text. So you have experiences, I guess. You ask question why when you see something happening. For example, right now, you may ask why I'm here to give this talk. So causal inference is one of the most important intelligence that human beings differentiate from other species. We have why questions, during our life, from the all beginning, across whole life. So let me just before I start the technical details, I will show you just I will give you just outline about my talk. So I will first introduce what is the causal inference, how we do the causal inference from the text. And then I will show you a case study, and then in the end, I will make a conclusion. All right, before I start, matter of fact, the detail about how we do the causal inference, I want to give you my personal journey, the story, how I started with this topic, causal inference. So just about, matter of fact, a year and a half ago, was at the end of the year 2019, my longtime collaborator from FDA, Food Drug Administration, came to my office. We had a meeting. He told me there is a challenge from FDA, organized by the FDA, to seek solutions to address the challenge of opioid epidemiology. So, matter of fact, every year in the United States, there are over 10,000 people died from overdose of opioid drug, and then NIH declares, and also the government declares the emergency or crisis of opioid drug. So the challenge was I need to develop some data science technology, not only can, for example, do something that typical machine learning data mining models can do, for example, predict who will get fatal outcome from prescription of opioid drug. He really want to get to find the root of the cause, why people died, why some people have survived. So that is really a challenge, and also gave me a really the input for innovations. So that basically it took me some time. We have a lot of meetings during the course, and then we found the data we can use, and we basically get here. This is a technology I want to share with you. It's causal inference from free text. Okay, so what is causation? Causation basically is the relationship between cause and effect. So the cause is responsible for the effect. For example, you can see, well, the drug can be a treatment for the disease. So if the drug is effective to cure the disease, that means that the patient is cured because the drug. And so we can take a probabilistic approach. This is the Bayesian statistical approach I really like. And so basically we can model random variables using the probabilistic model. For example, we can model all possible relationship between possible cause and effect. And but in order to determine a real causal and effect relationship, we have to do some intervention. We have to intervene the model. That means we have the model from the data, but when we try to use the model to infer the causes of certain effects, we have to modify, we have to do some surgery to the probabilistic model. So that is basically from the contribution of Dr. Yuda Pearl, who who is the pioneer of the causal inference in the computer science. And so he is the inventor of causal calculus, also called dual calculus. So what we do is like we will use the dual calculus, to figure out if, for example, the probability of y, that is the candidate of effect, that is truly because of the cause variable, that is the x. We will set the values change the values of the random variable x and see how that will affect the y. So this is different than the conditional probability of the y given x. So that is basically just probabilistic conditional dependency or association. But in the statistic, as you know, there's very famous code from Box, the Professor Box, who is the founding chair of the statistics department of University of Wisconsin Medicine. So what he said is that is very, very famous. We probably get it from statistics books or when we take the course. What he said is that the correlation does not imply causation. Matter of fact, that is very true. And so the question is, how can we separate associations, correlations from with causations? I have here in the slides an example of two variables. One is the violent rate or index. The other one is ice cream sales. As you can see, they have a perfect dependencies. That means the conditional probability knowing one for the other will be perfectly close to one. And but does that mean if we control, if ice cream sales is a cause of the violent crime or vice versa? Of course, from our very reasonable intuition, we can see definitely it's not. And so this is like the situation. We have the model with the two random variables. One is, for example, ice cream sales. The other one is the rate of violent crime. And they are clearly just associations. And if you really want to model, for example, found out what is really the cause of the crime, and you have to think about a bigger picture, include more variables. This is a system approach, and then you need to, for example, include temperature. That is, a very reasonable candidate of the cause for the crime or for the sales of the ice cream. For example, when the temperature is hot, people will go out, eat the ice cream, but also give a more, like a chance for the crime. So that is, if you are familiar with the probabilistic model, this joint probability of, all these variables in a system can be factorized by, using this, graph. We call it acyclic directed graph. It's the Bayesian network. And here's basically just the factorization of this joint probability consists of all these variables. But this is Bayesian network by itself is not able to tell us, what is the cause. So basically, this is the modeling phase. Given your data, you can, train a Bayesian network. But in order to figure out what is the cause, what is the effect from this system, probabilistic model, you have to do some, what I said, simulation. Okay, you have to do first. You have to, for example, to do some surgery, to the model, modify the model to, using the so-called dual calculus or causal calculus to determine if indeed, one factor or one variable is the cause of the other. So I would like to use a very you know, very real example, very close to our current situation. We have a COVID, right? It's a pandemic, and we have a different vaccines. But also we know for those patients, their outcome of COVID really depends on if they have a certain condition, for example, diabetes or heart disease. So this is a very simple model. In order to figure out if, for example, vaccine is effective for the treatment or prevention of the COVID disease, so we have to first, for example, we have to do a surgery. That means we will set the value of the vaccine to, for example, it's a binary variable. One means we give the patient vaccine, and 0 means the patient will not receive the vaccine. We want to see what is the difference, given all other conditions are the same. For example, existing conditions, whatever. So what do we need to, given this model, what do we need to do? We need to use the so-called do calculus to set the value of the vaccine to either 1 or 0. When we set the value of the random variable vaccine, that means vaccine will not be a truly random. So that means vaccine, before we did the surgery, did the modification of the distribution, vaccine is also depends on the condition. For example, those people with the conditions are required by the government to get the vaccine. But once we already gave the patient, the person, the vaccine or not the vaccine, is actually independent to the regulation of the government. So that means these conditional dependencies between the random variable vaccine and other conditions should be removed, should be dropped out. So that is the reason I put here a right cut. That means that is the surgery we did before we try to do the inference, right? And once we did this surgery, now as you can see, if you see the factorization changes, right? So this is a new factorization of this probabilistic model, which will need to be used for the inference, based on the do calculus. All right. So to summarize, basically we need 3 steps in order to do causal inference, no matter for what kinds of data. All right. So the first step is the modeling, the data modeling phase. That in this phase, we need to learn a joint probability of a complex stochastic system. Can be, for example, the patient, vaccine, and the conditions of the patient. The second step is do the surgery. So we need to modify the learned or the model we inferred using so-called the do calculus, right? We set the value for a certain random variable and want to see if that random variable has impact to other variables in the system. That is the intervention phase. In the third phase, we have to evaluate the effect, right? So for example, we want to see if Y, for example, is the COVID-19 survival or progress, and then the do, for example, is give the patient a vaccine or not give the patient a vaccine, and see what is the difference. We have to compare the two distributions and do some statistical tests like Z test and so on and so forth to see if there's truly some significant difference between the treatment, like using the vaccine or not using the vaccine. That is the evaluation phase. So this 3 phase is a very general framework for causal inference, but we have to do something in addition in order to be able to apply this framework to free text. Because free text, you have just words in a document, for example, medical notes, and we need a way basically to transform unstructured data into somehow structured data, because as you can see here, the model itself basically requires you have a certain number of random variables considered to be structured. So in order to transform the free text into some more close to structured data so that we can relevant random variables in terms of a concept or knowledge you want to apply the causal inference to those knowledge and concept. We have to do some natural language processing using language model. Okay, before I get there, I want to show you actually the framework I present here so far is a very powerful and can basically replace randomized controlled trials, right? Randomized, for those of you familiar with like a drug industry, pharmaceutical, business or epidemiology research, or from if you are familiar with statistics. So randomized control trial is a very fundamental for pharmaceutical company, for epidemiology, or many area of the science and engineering. The idea is that given some treatment, like for example vaccine, you want to see if the vaccine is really effective for the patient or not, or for any new drugs. If, for example, in the clinical trial, we want to FDA have a different phases for the clinical trial if the new treatment or drug apply for the approval from the FDA agency. So they have to do the random control trial. The idea is that you take some random, sample populations, for example, people with a certain disease, and then you, randomly split this patient into two groups, group 1, group 2. For group 1, you use the new treatment, for example, the drug. And for group 2, you use some placebos to avoid some bias of psychological factors. So in the end, you will compare the outcome of the two group of the patient and see if they're statistically different or not. So this is a very fundamental mechanism for causal inference in the real world right now. So people use in the industry, in the different science disciplines, and also engineering. Okay, so how can we, how this can be, replaced by the three-step framework I mentioned. So this is what, as an example, this is what I would like to do. What you need to do is you just, again, start with the first step, modeling, data modeling. So you get, for example, data, somewhere, and then you just model, the probabilistic relationship between the outcome and the treatment. Once you have the model, you just do apply surgery, I call it intervention here, and set the value of the treatment to give the treatment or not give the treatment, and see what is the difference between in the evaluation phase between the outcome of those some patient got the treatment and those didn't get the treatment, and see if they are statistically significant different or not. So this is exactly the framework I just presented earlier, but show you this is really a very general framework, can be applied to even to replace randomized controlled trials used by the industry right now. Okay, now I want to talk about the framework I used for the causal inference from the text. As I mentioned before, we have a lot of text, and we have to basically understand the text. It's like you want to have somebody, for example, read the text in a way like use a metaphor. A reader, for example, a detective story. Sherlock Holmes, for example, one of the most famous detective. And then the reader use the intelligence, can do the reasoning to, for example, infer or using intelligence to guess who is the murderer. Okay, who is the murderer of somebody. So this is like exactly what we need, the inference from the text. I think that is in my opinion, this is one of the most important direction for the artificial intelligence and data science to go. Because as a matter of fact, we have over 80% or 90% of the data we have today, they are all semi-structured or unstructured. That means they're all textual data. So there's a lot of knowledge, our human, knowledge from, the past to today. Most of the knowledge are documented in different, documents. For example, literatures, novels, poems, many others. So that is the biggest resource of human intelligence and knowledge from our history. And for that reason, I think this is indeed my favorite research topic. I believe will be a task for a long time, and there's a tremendous potential. And so it's not easy, of course. You have unstructured data, so you have to have some model, model, for example, the knowledge and concept from text with a lot of document in the corpus. All right. So we use language model. I will show you the language model in the next slides. Once we get the language model result, we need to get the result and continue train the language model for using fine tuning, so that we will get the system of concept and knowledge that we can apply the three-step causal inference framework I presented earlier. In order to figure out what is the cause, what is the effect. So this is all the simple pipeline for the framework of causal inference from text. Okay, so the language model we use is called bidirectional encoder representations from transformers. This is a probabilistic model of all vocabularies from large, English corpus. And the language model is used a neural network architecture called transformer. So you heard a lot of neural network architectures from very beginning, perceptron to multi-layer feed-forward neural network to convolutional neural network, many others. But most recently, matter of fact, it's about 2-3 years ago, the transformer has become very, very, I would say, superior and dominant in all the areas of big data and data science, including document natural language processing, also for image processing, most recently. So BERT, the bidirectional encoder representation from transformer, is from Google. They trained the model using largest corpus they can get at the time, including all the web pages and Google Books, many others. So they train the language model is as a encoder. So they provide encoder means you have a model that you take your data, feeding into the model will give you a vectors, set of vectors for all the, for example, the words or the terms in your document. So this is the model they pre-trained using their own corpus and release to the public. You can download from the internet yourself. So this model, of course, is just the model help us understand the relationship between the terms, probability dependency between the terms, but not the way you can use directly for causal inference. So what we need to do is we still need to use the 3 steps of the causal inference framework I showed you earlier. And so we need to basically found all the concept, build the relationship, model them in terms of statistical dependencies, and then do the causal inference with the following steps, including inventions and also evaluations. So for this study, the case study I presented here, we use, as I mentioned earlier, we use FDA data. FDA, want to address the opioid epidemics crisis. So actually, FDA, the major role of FDA is to protect patient public health using pharmacovigilance data. So there is a database required the pharmaceutical companies and physicians to report any side effect or adverse events from the treatment of patient using certain drugs or treatments. So this is the data they called from the FDA adversary events reporting system. In this reporting system, they have tens of thousands of document of individual drug safety case report. In a way, kind of like this, like the image I show here, with a lot of notes from the physicians or medical doctors, and then of course you can use some technology to turn that handwritten notes into some text. The text will look like this. For example, as an example, the patient takes the primary suspected drug with some additional secondary suspect drug to treat certain disease, for example, the pain, and cause some adverse drug reaction, for example, nausea, whatever, and leading to the outcome, for example, death or hospitalization, and so on and so forth. So this is basically just the data we use as a text. And what we do is, as I said, the model architecture is like this. This part is the middle part here is just the BERT language model pre-trained, all right? And then we take the free text data as an input to the pre-trained language model, and then we basically have a downstream task model, which is a probabilistic model of all the concept we want to analyze, including, for example, sex, age, location. Location means if the patient is from United States or from Europe or wherever. And then a PSD means the primary suspected drug and dose. And then INDI means indication. And AE, adversary events. And outcome means if the patient is alive or hospitalized or even dead. So we will train the model, fine-tune the model using probabilistic predications. For example, we want to predict the outcome of the patient using all other random variables, including those I just mentioned earlier. And then this is basically the modeling phase. We get a probabilistic model of all the factors we want to infer, candidate of, causalities. And then we will do the causal inference using do calculus. So, for example, we want to predict what is the outcome of the patient. If we set the sex of the patient is a female, that means we want to see what is the generally speaking, given all other conditions are the same. If the patient is a female, we turn the gender, the sex of the patient to female, how that will impact the result of the outcome of the patient. So this is just one example. Matter of fact, we have to do it for using all other random variables, as I showed you earlier, and then figure out which one give us the largest, most significant difference between intervention, different use different random variables following by using do calculus. So that is basically the approach we took, following exactly the 3 steps framework I mentioned earlier. Okay, so just give you a little bit of statistic about the data. So we use one very popular opioid drug called codeine. All right, codeine is a very popular drug for the pain relief after surgery or whatever. And then there are over 4,000 case report from FDA system. And then from all this report, there are 33% cases with the outcome that the patient died, and 66% or 67% patient are still alive. So that is the statistic distribution of the data we use. And here are the accuracy to predict the outcome based on all other variables, including age, gender, and so on and so forth. As you can see, the accuracy of our probabilistic model got the predictive accuracy to 88 or almost 88%. Compared to the decision tree, for those of you familiar with machine learning or data mining, decision tree is a very popular approach, especially if you have a semi-structured data or discrete random variables. So using the decision tree, you can get 81% accuracy. As you can see, the accuracy using our model is far superior compared to using standard state-of-the-art approach of machine learning. So here's the result of the do calculus. All right. Of course, we did a lot of inferences using different random variables. I just show you the most important, the most significant cause for the patient death, overdose, because of overdose of opioid drugs. Matter of fact, the suicide attempt, which is indication, one of the indication is the major cause. As you can see here, if we use the do calculus, set the pre-existing condition or indication of the patient has suicide attempt, then the probability of the death of the patient will be jump from 36% to 64%. That means the probability is much higher. And this different statistics, the difference is through statistics test is very significant. So this is a major cause of the opioid overdose, death. So matter of fact, how can we verify this? Matter of fact, I'm not the doctor. I did try to validate this result myself. I use a Google search, and there's no information. Nobody knows actually the suicide attempt. But about the same time, I found one research did by Harvard Medical School, right? So this is the reference. This, by the way, as I said, we did this research by the end, close to the end of the year 2019. So this study done by Harvard Medical School is about the same time. So what they found is a very, coincident to what I found using my, causal inference framework. The approach they took is very traditional, like a randomized, controlled trials. What they did is they did a survey to the patient, prescribed with opioid drugs. So what they found out is that through this, survey, close to 60% of the patient has already, before they got the treatment, has already certain desire over in a scale from 1 to 10. 10 means the patient will definitely want to die, and 1 means the patient does not want to die at all. So in the scale between 1, 2, 3, all the way to 10, so they gave this patient, they survey, asked the patient to check whichever level matches their desire to die. So in the end, they found like 58% of the patient has some desire to die. That means over 5 in the scale. And then even, matter of fact, there are 36% of the patient, they have a very strong desire to die. That means the scale is over 7. I mean 8, 9, or 10. Even there are 21% of patients, they absolutely want to die. And so the conclusion is that the motivation of suicidal motivation before opioid overdose is very common. So that is the discovery done by physicians from the medical school, and so I consider this is a very strong, like you know um, um, like a very strong coincidence with our discovery using data science approach. So this is very encouraging. So to conclude my talk today, I will say we have achieved a causal inference from text. We have a three-step framework that can be applied to the text. And using a case study for opioid drug overdose deaths, we found we can predict using the model with a high accuracy of 88%. And then not only that, but also we can discover the cause of the death of the patient. And that is in certain way is validated or by the study done by Harvard Medical School. So these are the reference. You can I will email the reference to you if you are interested. And with that, thank you so much. I'm ready for any feedback and question.